The morning I found the music box, I almost didn't open it. It was sitting in a cardboard box my son-in-law had left on my porch, things from my daughter's storage unit that nobody had touched in 3 years. He'd finally cleared it out. He had a right to. I understood that. I told myself I understood that. I set the box on the kitchen table and made myself a cup of coffee first. I stood at the window and watched the bird feeder swing in the October wind. A chickadee landed, pecked twice, left. I thought, I can do this. 3 years is long enough. Suzanne would want me to go through her things. I still wasn't sure I believed that, but I opened the box anyway. There were scarves, a few paperback novels with cracked spines, a ceramic mug she bought at a craft fair in Vermont the summer before she got sick. I remembered the exact weekend because I'd driven up with her and we'd eaten lobster rolls sitting on a dock, and she'd laughed so hard at something I said that she choked on her lemonade. I had to hold the mug with both hands. The music box was at the bottom, wrapped in an old dish towel. It was pale blue with a tiny painted forget-me-not on the lid. I didn't recognize it. I'd never seen it in her apartment, never seen it in her childhood room. I turned it over. Nothing on the bottom. I wound the key on the side and lifted the lid. It played "You Are My Sunshine," and a folded piece of paper fell out onto my kitchen table. I almost didn't read it. I almost set it aside, told myself it was nothing, a receipt, a grocery list, something ordinary. But my hands were already unfolding it. They did it before my brain caught up. It was a drawing, a child's drawing, in crayon, a woman with brown hair and a big yellow sun above her head, and next to her, a little girl with red pigtails. Underneath, in careful, wobbly letters that were clearly written by a small child who had practiced very hard, me and Mama. I sat down. I don't remember deciding to sit down. I was just suddenly in the chair. Suzanne didn't have children. She told me years ago that she and Marcus weren't planning on it, that the timing never felt right, that she was focused on her work. I'd accepted that. It wasn't my place to push. She was 34 years old and it was her life, and I was the kind of mother who tried very hard, not to be the kind of mother who made her daughter feel like she was failing at something. But I was looking at a crayon drawing that said Mama, and I didn't recognize the handwriting. Not Suzanne's, too small, too young, a child's. I turned the paper over. On the back in Suzanne's handwriting, her real handwriting, the loopy cursive she'd had since middle school. 3 words. She doesn't know. I didn't sleep that night. I made a list of every explanation that wasn't the obvious one and crossed them all off one by one. By 2 in the morning, I was sitting at the kitchen table in the dark with the drawing in front of me, and I had no more explanations. My daughter had a child, somewhere, and no one had told me. The first person I called was my sister Renee, not because I thought she knew anything. Renee lived in Phoenix. She and Suzanne had been close, but not confiding secrets close, but because Renee is the person I call when the ground drops out from under me. She's always been that. Even when we were little girls, she was the steady one. She answered on the 3rd ring, groggy, alarmed. It was 6 in the morning, her time. "June," she said. "What happened?" Not a question. Renee always knows. I told her about the music box. I told her about the drawing. I read her the 3 words on the back. There was a long silence on the line. "Call Marcus," she said. "I can't call Marcus." "June." "He just sent me a box of her things, Renee. He's trying to move forward. I can't call him and ask if my daughter had a secret child." Another silence. Then, "Do you want me to fly out?" I said no. I said I was fine. I said I'd figure it out. I hung up and sat there another hour before I finally got dressed and drove to the cemetery. Suzanne is buried in Millbrook Cemetery, 20 minutes from my house in Connecticut. It's a quiet place. Old trees. The kind of cemetery that's been there long enough that it doesn't feel sad so much as settled. I'd been going every Sunday since the funeral. I don't know what I was expecting to get from it. She wasn't there, not really. But I went anyway. It was the only ritual I had left. I pulled up to the section where her stone is, and I saw a car I didn't recognize parked nearby. An old Subaru, one of the back windows cracked with tape across it. I didn't think much of it. People visit graves. I walked up the path and stopped. There was a little girl sitting on the grass in front of Suzanne's headstone. She was maybe 5, maybe 6, red hair in 2 uneven pigtails, one higher than the other, like she'd done them herself, or someone had done them in a hurry. She was wearing a purple coat that was too thin for October, and she was talking, just talking, quietly to the headstone. I couldn't hear what she was saying. Behind her, a young woman was standing with her back to me, arms crossed, shoulders hunched. She turned when he heard my footsteps on the gravel. She couldn't have been more than 25, dark circles under her eyes, pretty in a tired way. She looked at me and went very still. The little girl turned too, and I stopped breathing. She had Suzanne's nose, not similar, not reminiscent of, exactly Suzanne's nose, the specific upturned shape of it that I'd kissed 10,000 times, and the way she tilted her head when she looked at me, that was Suzanne too, the questioning tilt, the slight furrow between the brows. "Who are you?" the little girl asked, completely direct, the way children are. I couldn't speak for a moment. I looked at the young woman. She looked like she wanted to run. "I'm sorry," the young woman said. Her voice was strained. "We were just leaving. Please don't go," I said. It came out quieter than I meant it to. "Please, I'm June. I'm Suzanne's mother." The young woman closed her eyes. When she opened them, she looked like someone who had been dreading this moment, and had also, somewhere underneath the dread, been hoping for it. "I know who you are," she said. "She talked about you all the time. Her name was Amanda. She'd met Suzanne 4 years ago through a mutual friend, an overlap in their social circles that I hadn't known about. A chapter of my daughter's life that existed entirely outside the frame of what I knew. They'd been close, she told me. Not the way people sometimes say, close as a soft way of saying something else. Close like sisters. Close like the kind of friendship that forms fast and holds weight. The little girl's name was Ivy. We sat in my car because it was cold, and Ivy wanted to know if I had any snacks. I did. I keep a tin of shortbread cookies in the glove compartment. I always have. It was something my own mother did. Ivy ate 4 cookies and told me very seriously that she preferred the ones with the hole in the middle. But these were acceptable. Amanda talked slowly, like she was choosing each word carefully. She'd been 19 when Ivy was born, alone. The father was not part of the picture and hadn't been since she'd told him she was pregnant. She'd had nobody. Suzanne showed up, she said. I don't know how else to describe it. She just showed up, brought food, helped me figure out the insurance stuff, came to the hospital. She paused. She was there when Ivy was born. She was the first person who held her. I thought about my daughter in a hospital room, holding a newborn that wasn't hers, at the same time that I had no idea any of it was happening. I was 60 miles away. I was probably watching television. She never told me, I said. It wasn't an accusation. It was just bewildered, the plain fact of it. Amanda looked at her hands. She wanted to. She talked about it. But she kept saying she wasn't sure how you'd react to all of it, to me, to the situation. She hesitated. And then she got sick so fast. It happened so fast. She made me promise to keep Ivy safe. I think she was worried about certain people finding out. Which people? Amanda was quiet for a moment. Ivy had fallen asleep against my arm, her cookie half eaten in her hand, her pigtails a shoe. The weight of her was warm. Her sister-in-law, Amanda said, Claudia. I want to be fair. I've tried to be fair about Claudia, even sitting here now, even knowing everything I know. She is Marcus's sister, and she loved him in her way. But she is also the kind of woman who has always believed that love is a resource that runs out, and she has spent 30 years trying to make sure she gets her share before anyone else can take it. She'd never hidden the fact that she resented Suzanne. Not openly. Claudia is too calculated for open anything, but in the way she'd talk over her at family dinners, in the way she'd reference Marcus's life before with a particular kind of emphasis, in the way she'd gone to Marcus immediately after Suzanne's diagnosis and started what she called helping him prepare. What she was preparing him for, I'd understood later, was a version of the future that benefited Claudia. Suzanne had a life insurance policy, $250,000. It was meant for Marcus, but she'd also had a secondary document, a separate trust, set up quietly through a lawyer Amanda didn't know the name of, that was intended to go to Amanda and Ivy. That document had disappeared. Amanda had found out about it because Suzanne had mentioned it once near the end. There's something set up for you and the baby. You won't have to worry. She'd told Amanda the lawyer's name, but by the time Suzanne died and Amanda tried to contact him, he'd moved his practice out of state and the trust paperwork couldn't be located. Marcus said he didn't know anything about it. Claudia, when Amanda had called her, had been cold and brief and told Amanda she didn't know who she was and had no business calling the family. "She called you back, though," I said. "I don't know why I was so sure of this. I just was." Amanda looked at me steadily. 2 days later, from a number I didn't recognize, she told me that if I made any claims on the estate, she'd make sure I was investigated for fraud. A pause. Ivy was 8 months old. I sat there with Ivy asleep against my arm, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not grief. Something older and harder than grief. Something that had no name in polite conversation. "Tell me everything," I said, "from the beginning." I spent the next 6 weeks being very quiet and very patient and very deliberate. I'm 67 years old, and I have learned the hard way more than once that the impulse to act immediately when you are angry is almost never the right choice. Anger makes noise. I needed to be silent. I started with Suzanne's lawyer, not the one Amanda didn't know, but Suzanne's personal attorney, a man named Peter Holloway, who had drawn up her will and who I'd spoken to briefly after the funeral. I called him and told him I had reason to believe there was a secondary document he might not be aware of, a trust established outside the primary estate. He was quiet for a long moment. "I'll need to do some research," he said. "Can you give me a few days?" He called back in 4. He'd found the record of filing, not the document itself, but the filing record, the proof that it had existed. The lawyer who'd moved practices had digitized his old client records, and when Peter reached him and explained the situation, the man, his name was Stuart Beale, he was in Charlotte now, he was horrified. Stuart Beale provided a copy of the original trust document within 48 hours. Claudia had known about the trust. She'd found out because Marcus had discovered an email from Stuart Beale in Suzanne's account after she died. He'd been going through her email looking for subscription cancellations, something practical like that, something that sounds so small. And he'd mentioned it to Claudia before he understood what it meant. And Claudia had understood what it meant very quickly. She'd contacted Stuart Beale's firm and told them the trust had been revoked by the grantor before her death. It hadn't. There was no revocation on file, but the firm was small and overwhelmed, and she had been authoritative, and they had, God help them, they had simply accepted what she said and moved on. $250,000 that belonged to Amanda and Ivy had simply been absorbed into the estate. I learned all of this carefully, step by step, through Peter Holloway, and then through a second attorney, an estate litigator named Helen Marsh, whom Peter recommended, a small woman with a precise voice who looked at the documents Stuart Beale sent and said very calmly, "This is fraud. This is quite clear-cut fraud." I asked her what we needed to do. She told me. The hardest part was Marcus. Not because I didn't trust him. I think Marcus is genuinely not a bad man. I think he was grieving and exhausted, and he'd let his sister manage things because that was easier than managing them himself. But he had benefited from it, even unknowingly, and I had to tell him. I drove to his house on a Tuesday evening in December. He opened the door and looked surprised, and then, when he saw my face, looked afraid. We sat at his kitchen table, the same table where Suzanne and I had eaten Christmas dinner 3 years ago, and I told him everything. I put the copy of the trust document in front of him. I put the email trail in front of him. I watched his face go through confusion and then disbelief, and then something that looked like nausea. She told me there was nothing, he said. He wasn't talking about Suzanne. He was talking about his sister. I know. She told me the lawyers had confirmed there was no secondary document. I know. He put his hands flat on the table. He looked at the papers for a long time. Is there a little girl? He said. His voice was very careful. Her name is Ivy, I said. She has Suzanne's nose, and she likes shortbread cookies. He pressed the back of his hand to his mouth. He was quiet for a while. I waited. What do you need from me? He said finally. I need you to tell the truth when Helen Marsh asks you what Claudia told you. He nodded. Just once. But it was enough. Claudia didn't know it was coming until it was already there. That's the thing about being underestimated. It works in your favor sometimes. I am a 67-year-old retired schoolteacher. I drove a 10-year-old Honda. I did not look like someone who had spent 6 weeks building a fraud case against her with 2 attorneys and a paper trail that went back to a digitized client file in Charlotte, North Carolina. Helen filed a civil action in January. Peter handled the probate reopening. Marcus provided his statement. Stuart Beale provided his records. The estate was reopened and the court appointed an independent administrator who looked at the paper trail and arrived at exactly the conclusion the paper trail pointed to. Claudia hired a lawyer. He was expensive and loud and accomplished nothing. The case, according to Helen, was clear enough that it barely needed arguing. Fraudulent misrepresentation to a law firm, interference with a testamentary document. The numbers were undeniable. The documentation was thorough, and Claudia, who had spent 30 years being authoritative and assuming people would simply accept what she said, had not been careful enough because she hadn't thought anyone would look. The court ordered the trust to be honoured. $250,000 plus interest, disbursed to the trust account Helen had established for Amanda and Ivy. Claudia was referred for criminal review. I don't know exactly what will come of that. The wheels of that move slowly. But they move. Helen told me she had every reason to expect charges would be filed, and I believed her. I drove home from Helen's office on a February afternoon, with the snow coming down soft on the highway, and I cried for about 15 miles. Not sad crying, the other kind. The kind that comes out when something has been held in your chest so long it has to find its way out somehow. I need to tell you about the Sunday 2 weeks after the court decision. Amanda drove up from New Haven with Ivy, who was almost 6 now and very interested in the fact that I had a bird feeder and wanted to know if we could put seeds in it together. We did. She stood on the stool I'd gotten out, and she was very concentrated about it, very serious, making sure each separate seed went in correctly. Afterward, we sat on the back porch wrapped in blankets, because it was still cold. But Ivy wanted to be outside, and neither of us had the heart to say no. And Amanda told me about the last time she'd seen Suzanne. She was tired, Amanda said, but she was still her, you know. She asked about Ivy's teeth, because one was coming in crooked, and she'd been worried about it. She wanted to know if I'd talked to the pediatrician. Amanda smiled at her hands. She was sick, and she was thinking about a crooked tooth. That was her, I said. I know it was. She paused. She talked about you that day. She said she was sorry she hadn't figured out how to tell you yet. She said you would have loved this, being here for it. She said she thought you would have been, her voice caught. She said she thought you would have been a magnificent grandmother. I looked out at the bird feeder. A cardinal had landed on it, very red in the February light. She was right, I said. I would have been. Ivy climbed up into my lap without being asked, the way children do when they've decided they trust you. No ceremony, no announcement, just suddenly there. She smelled like the lavender soap Amanda used, and she leaned back against my chest and pointed at the cardinal. That one's Mama, she said matter-of-factly. She visits. I tightened my arms around her. I didn't argue. I keep the music box on the mantel now. Every morning when I come downstairs, it's the first thing I see. Pale blue with the little painted forget-me-not. I wind it sometimes, not always. When I do, the notes come out a little slowly because the mechanism is old, and it makes the song sound more like a lullaby than I remember it being. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. Suzanne used to sing that song to the cat when she was 11 years old. She didn't know the rest of the lyrics, so she just repeated the first verse over and over. I'd stand in the hallway outside her room and listen and try not to laugh and fail completely. I am 67 years old, and 3 months ago I thought the rest of my life was going to be about diminishment, about things getting smaller, about the bird feeder and the Sunday drives and the slow process of learning to take up less space in a world that no longer had my daughter in it. I was wrong. Ivy comes every Sunday now. Amanda is looking at an apartment in town. Nothing decided, but she's looking. We have an arrangement. I make the cookies. Ivy refills the bird feeder. Amanda brings the coffee because she insists mine is too weak. And I insist this is a matter of opinion. And Ivy sides with her mother, which is correct of her. It is not what I would have chosen. None of it. Not the loss, not the years of not knowing, not the grief that I still carry and will carry until I don't carry anything anymore. If I could have my daughter back, I would give up all of it, every good thing that came after, without a moment's hesitation. But this is what I have. This child who climbs into my lap without being asked. This young woman who drives up from New Haven every Sunday with coffee she thinks is better than mine. This music box on the mantel. This is what Suzanne left behind. She always was, even at the end, thinking of everyone else, worrying about a crooked tooth, trying to figure out how to tell me, leaving behind something bright and small and permanent in a pale blue box wrapped in a dish towel, waiting for me to be ready. I found it on a Tuesday in October, when the chickadee left the bird feeder and flew away, and I thought, I can do this. I can do this. I've thought a lot about what Claudia must have told herself to make it feel acceptable. That's the thing about people who do wrong quietly. They always have a story. They always have a version of events where they're the reasonable one, the practical one, the one who was simply managing a difficult situation that no one else had the stomach for. Claudia would have told herself that Amanda was a stranger, that the trust was legally murky, that she was protecting her brother. People who take from others rarely think of it as taking. They think of it as correcting an imbalance in their favor. But here is what I know. She made that choice. And every choice like that has a cost that comes due eventually, not because the universe is keeping score in some mystical ledger, but because the truth is stubborn. It doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It waits. It sits in a digitized client file in Charlotte, North Carolina, and it waits for someone patient enough to go looking. I was patient. That was the only thing I had going for me in those 6 weeks. Patience and the particular kind of stubbornness that comes from having nothing left to lose. When Suzanne died, I thought the worst had already happened. And in a strange way that freed me. I wasn't afraid of making waves, because I was already soaking wet. I had no reputation to protect in Claudia's world, no relationship with her worth preserving. I just had a paper trail and 2 good lawyers and a daughter who had quietly tried to do right by people she loved, even when she was dying. That is what I want to say about Suzanne, not about the fraud, not about the legal outcome, about her. She was sick and frightened, and she still spent her last months making sure a young woman and an 8-month-old baby would be taken care of. She did it imperfectly. She didn't tell me. She ran out of time. She trusted a system that let her down, but she tried. The trying matters. I have come to believe that the trying is almost the whole thing. What I carry forward from all of this is not bitterness, though I earned the right to it. It is something closer to clarity, about what it means to show up for people, about what it costs to be dishonest and what it costs to be patient and what it costs quietly every single day to love someone you've lost. Those costs are real. I don't want to make this pretty and simple by pretending they aren't. But I also know this. On Sunday mornings now, a little girl with uneven pigtails stands on a stool at my bird feeder and counts the seeds out loud. She is learning to read. She has her mother's stubbornness and her grandmother's nose and a laugh that comes out of nowhere and fills the whole kitchen. That is not a small thing. That is not an accident. That is what happens when one person, even imperfectly, even running out of time, decides that love is worth arranging for, worth leaving behind in a pale blue music box wrapped in a dish towel, waiting for the right Tuesday in October. I think about that every time I wind the key.